guy said to him, I could do your job. I'm like, okay. So I invited him to come and sit with me and the team for the day. And I said, right, okay, right. So you can do my job. So, and he was like, what do you mean, there you go? And I'm like, well, no, you said this job is really, really easy. So I'm going to let you get on with it. You run it for the day and see how
See what
you get on.
happens. Yeah.
And I went off. I went to get coffee. And within like 10, 15 minutes, he rang me and said, Lisa, I can't do this. I've already had 6 people come up and ask me questions about campaigns. What am I supposed to say to them? Like, but you
Yeah.
said it was easy. You said it was just posting stuff on social media. So just post some stuff. It's like, well, obviously it's not that simple. And it's like, you have no idea just how I have spreadsheets upon spreadsheets, meetings upon meetings, not just with internal stakeholders, but with external stakeholders as well. Especially from a luxury brand perspective, you have to consider things like, okay, if we're creating a piece of content in collaboration with your brand, it has to meet our guidelines, it has to meet your guidelines. There's a whole approval process that could take days, weeks, months. It's so the piece of content that you see in your feed is the end result of what can be an extremely lengthy process.
Yeah.
We used to plan, we'd be planning for Christmas 2020 now. That's how it
Wow.
works. Some brands work 2, 3, 4 years ahead of time.
Yeah.
Writing, a social communications plan for a campaign that's not happening for another year and a half. And obviously things are prone to change, but you need to be flexible. But it needs to be, that's how granular it is. It's not, I always say this to people because I lecture as well at the London College of Fashion. And I always say to people, never fall into the trap of thinking social media is just a point and shoot thing and point and shoot and post. It takes planning. It takes a lot of thought. It takes a lot of consideration. There are so many other factors. You've got to think about your tone of voice. You've got to think about, the kind of the guidelines in terms of your brand. You've got to think of, okay, if you want to piggyback on a particular subject, is that subject relevant for your brand? Is it appropriate for you? There are so many things that you have to consider. It's not just a case of taking a picture and posting it. It is as you're doing it as a private individual and you're not bothered about your social media. But social media from a professional perspective is extremely different to social media from a personal perspective. And I lost count of the amount of times, I used to say this to people who just thought, you just post stuff. It's like there are, especially as my role developed at Harrods and as the social media grew, I spent less and less time actually posting content. I was the one behind the scenes leading everything, making sure that that everything was in place in order for my team to be able to do their job with the greatest of ease. As the time went on, I spent less and less time actually creating the content. I was actually leading the team and managing the team who were actually creating the content. So yeah, it's definitely not just a case of sitting on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram all day. I wish it was.
No, I feel for you with the the I suppose the size and the pressures that come with a brand like Harrods. That especially when you first go into that must be pretty daunting and pretty stressful. Let alone when you get into a place where it's becoming successful, and then you have to keep the momentum going, and you have to challenge yourself and challenge the brand and all these kind of things. That's a big ask, and it's kind of interesting that you say you've talked loads about the way you see social and the way you built Harrods Instagram and overall social presence was connecting with people, the simple hellos, the good nights, the engaging when they're in the building and trying to do nice things for them and all that kind of stuff. So how have you then found the switch? Because I've kind of gone on the same transition as you over the years with the various different things. But how have you found the switch from I want to engage with people because that's how I'm going to build a brand to, I suppose, a more data-led approach now in that there is so much data available. You can personalize content and you can target content down to places that you've visited, where you've been, where you're going, where you've booked, keywords in searches that you've made, or there's such a vast amount of data. How do you combine engaging followers versus using the data to your advantage?
I think for me, I think the thing is, I haven't really changed my outlook in terms of social media. I think, at its very core, centrally, it is about engagement. And for me, it's about me. I've kept my belief that those simple things are still some of the most effective things you can do. I think the great thing about data is data allows you to create more relevant content, because doing things like good morning and hello and all that kind of, that's more generic. That's more wider reaching. I think personally, I think having data is great, because I think one of the things I would say that in the early days of social, we were just kind of throwing things at the wall and seeing what stuck, and then repeating those things. Whereas with the introduction of data and things like that, it allows you to be really intelligent with your social media. And as I said before, it's all about layers. So for me, the foundational stuff will still be engaging with somebody who might come into one of my clients' stores or use one of my clients' businesses. But then on top of that, I'm going to layer the more kind of data-driven content, the more specific content. I personally don't think it's good to get too obsessed with data, because I do think social media is equally about human behavior, and human behavior can't necessarily be quantified by data. Why does somebody like a particular brand over another? Why do you choose to wear Adidas trainers instead of Nike? There are a whole host of reasons for that. And
data is not emotive in that way.
Yeah, data is not emotive. Data is just numbers.
Yeah.
It's just numbers. It's just figures. And don't get me wrong, it's very important, and your data should be your best friend. But it shouldn't overtake the emotive side of social media. It should complement it. That's how I feel.
Yeah. It's a guide, not an answer.
Yeah, I don't think data-driven content should be used in isolation, and I don't think emotive content should be used in isolation. I think there always needs to be a marriage between the two. I think that's really, really important.
Okay, so on that then, in the merging of the data and the engagement and that kind of stuff, do you think that social is missing anything in particular? Do you think there's something that over the years has fell out of social and that whole space, or that needs to be brought into it a little bit more?
I think the kind of stuff what we discussed with the Harris thing, with saying the good morning, and I think that kind of side of things has fallen by the wayside a little bit. I think we've gone through a stage with social where people have been so desperate to grow their following and have a massive following. They're just doing what there's definitely an element of, or has been and still is to a degree, an element of people doing whatever they think they need to do in order to get those numbers and get those massive numbers and get that massive following. I do think the social has gone out of social media a little bit. I don't think people are as social as they used to be. I also don't think it's as positive a space sometimes as it used to be. When I first joined social media, I met people like yourself, and I'm not saying it was all touchy feely, nicely, but it was definitely a lot more positive, much more of a positive space than maybe it is now. Especially if you look at something like Twitter. When I joined Twitter, Twitter was quite a happy place. Fast forward to present day, there is definitely an undercurrent of negativity, especially from a political perspective. If you think about what's going on in the world now, social media, there is a kind of a darker side to it. And I think that's becoming more and more prominent, which I think in some ways is not a terrible thing, but it's also not a great thing either. So I do think the idea of being social has gone out of social media a little bit, which is a bit sad.
Do you think, though, I've had this conversation plenty of times with plenty of people, and probably you as well over the years, but do you think that you mentioned the underlying negativity and the political agendas and all these kinds of things that you see now, do you think that they've just always been there, but social has give them a platform? Like anyone can open a Twitter account and rant about anything they want to rant about. That's kind of the freedom of these social platforms. So I think is there an element of everyone's always had these opinions, but now, you become an influencer when you start guiding the thought process towards a particular result. So do you think there's just more of that, where we mentioned before we started recording, anyone can become an influencer now with the right tools, with the right kind of level of commitment? It's not. I don't think it's particularly difficult to do that now, especially with the likes of the bots and you're buying followers. And as soon as, like we've said many times, as soon as a brand can see the number of followers that you've got, engaged or not, that vanity number becomes a tool to a brand or to an agenda?
I do think that, I love social media, and I think I see a lot of positives about it. I see social media for the potential that it has and the benefits that it can offer to individuals, businesses, to everyone. But I do think it's given rise to, like, a lot of keyboard warriors. It's given rise to everybody who has an opinion about everything. And I'm not saying, that's not a bad thing. I do believe that it's made the world more connected. It's made the world more informed. It's given access to industries and areas, parts of industries that regular people like myself would never have had access to. But I do think, the caveat there is, not every opinion is necessarily a positive one or a good one.
It's not a valid opinion every time.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, not every complaint is a valid complaint. Not everything, people will just attack people on Twitter or on any platform. And that, for me, is where I kind of go off in a different direction. Don't get me wrong. I'm all for people having a voice. I'm all for people being entitled to their opinions and saying what they think. But when that starts to become really negative or divisive, or damaging in some way to another person or other people, that, for me, is where it goes too far. And I think that, for me, is one of the downsides of social media. Whilst it's great that people have a voice and people can be influential, some of those voices and some of those influencers are not necessarily positive. And for me, the worry is, what effect does that have on people? Because not everybody is strong. I can see something on Twitter. Somebody could send me an insult and be like, you know what, screw you, I don't care anyway. But on the flip side, there'll be that person out there who sees that and takes that incredibly personally. And especially now, where mental health is a big issue, mental health has finally kind of taken on more of a public kind of platform in terms of people being open about it and talking about it, which is what should have happened all along. I think that's something we need to be mindful of from a social media perspective. I've lost count of the amount of people I speak to who say, they get depressed when they look at other people's Instagrams. And I always say to people, not everything you see on social media is an absolute representation of the truth.
Oh, no.
It's other people's show reels, and you need to remember that. You're seeing somebody who is, on a beautiful desert island somewhere. How do you even know that image is real?
Yeah. Do you know what?
And I think that's the thing for me.
I remember having this exact conversation with a guy I used to work with, and we'd, to digress a little bit, we'd been out with the family that weekend and took a picture of the kids, sat on the bale of hay because we'd been pumpkin picking or something, and they were all smiles and all nice and all this kind of stuff, and it was a really nice picture of the kids. We posted it on Instagram or Facebook or whatever it was, and everyone liked it, like it was really nice and all this kind of stuff. The guy goes, how do you get pictures of your kids like that when I can't? Like, I've got a couple of kids and they're absolute mayhem. They go nuts, they go crazy, we take them out and all this. I was like, you've just seen 1 millisecond of like a 48-hour weekend. Like, it wasn't even that. It was one single snapshot. Like, there's 9 other pictures there where they're both slapping each other and arguing with each other and all this kind of stuff. And it always kind of stays in the back of my head when I hear people say that about how real Instagram is or how real social is. It's as real as the people are letting you see it to be.
Exactly.
I've been through a whole fitness thing and a well-being thing and all that over the past few years, and the amount of people who get more respect for saying, this is what I look like when I'm healthy and fit, and this is what I actually look like on a Friday night when I'm eating pizza and watching a film. It's like you have to have them two sides in your head of what's real life and what's being presented to you. And I think, like you mentioned before, especially like younger kids now who don't know any different other than Facebook and Instagram can be really affected by it and can see it and think that's the life I want and get depressed because it's not.
And that's the thing, and that's one of the reasons why, people often ask me, why have I never gone into being an influencer myself? Why have I never? Because I especially in my last job, I did a lot of exciting things. I traveled all over the world. I went to exciting fashion shows. I did all these things. But a lot of the time, I didn't post a lot of stuff on my personal channels. A, because obviously that was my job and I wanted to be as professional as possible. But B, as well, I didn't want people to think that that was my life. My life wasn't about going to fashion shows and sitting on a front row, and it's not as glamorous as it sounds. Yeah. And I didn't ever want to be in that position where a young girl or a young boy looks at my feed and thinks, why don't I have that life? Because my life isn't actually like that. That was my job, and I'm very honest when I talk to people. I say, look, you know what? The reason I got invited to those things was it was my job